Still less could anyone believe this to be the case when the law of the Church was sometimes so divergent from the civil law that Ignatius the Martyr, Justin, Athenagoras, and Tertullian publicly denounced as unjust and adulterous certain marriages which had been sanctioned by imperial law. Furthermore, after all power had devolved upon the Christian emperors, the supreme pontiffs and bishops assembled in council persisted with the same independence and consciousness of their right in commanding or forbidding in regard to marriage whatever they judged to be profitable or expedient for the time being, however much it might seem to be at variance with the laws of the state. It is well known that, with respect to the impediments arising from the marriage bond, through vow, disparity of worship, blood relationship, certain forms of crime, and from previously plighted troth, many decrees were issued by the rulers of the Church at the councils of Granada, Arles, Chalcedon, the second of Milibom, and others, which were often widely different from the decrees sanctioned by the laws of the empire. Furthermore, so far were Christian princes from arrogating any power in the matter of Christian marriage that they, on the contrary, acknowledged and declared that it belonged exclusively in all its fullness to the Church. In fact, Honorius, the younger Theodosius, and Justinian also hesitated not to confess that the only power belonging to them in relation to marriage was that of acting as guardians and defenders of the holy canons. If at any time they enabled anything by their edicts concerning impediments of marriage, they voluntarily explained the reason, affirming that they took it upon themselves so to act by leave and authority of the Church, whose judgment they were wont to appeal to and reverently to accept in all questions that concerned legitimacy and divorce, as also in all those points which in any way have a necessary connection with the marriage bond. The Council of Trent, therefore, had the clearest right to define that it is in the Church power to establish detriment The Council of Trent, therefore, had the clearest right to define that it is in the Church power to establish deriment impediments of matrimony, and that matrimonial causes pertain to ecclesiastical judges. Let no one then be deceived by the distinction which some civil jurists have so strongly insisted upon, the distinction, namely, by virtue of which they sever the matrimonial contract from the sacrament, with intent to hand over the contract to the power and will of the rulers of the state, while reserving questions concerning the sacrament of the Church. A distinction, or rather severance, of this kind cannot be approved. For certain it is that in Christian marriage, the contract is inseparable from the sacrament, and that for this reason the contract cannot be true and legitimate without being a sacrament as well. For Christ our Lord added to marriage the dignity of a sacrament, but marriage is the contract itself, whenever that contract is lawfully concluded. Marriage, moreover, is a sacrament, because it is a holy sign which gives grace, showing forth an image of the mystical nuptials of Christ with the Church. But the form and image of these nuptials is shown precisely by the very bond of that most close union in which man and woman are bound together in one, which bond is nothing else but the marriage itself. Hence it is clear that among Christians every true marriage is in itself and by itself a sacrament. and that nothing can be farther from the truth than to say that the sacrament is a certain added ornament or outward endowment which can be separated and torn away from the contract at the caprice of man. Neither therefore by reasoning can it be shown, nor by any testimony of history be proved, that power over the marriages of Christians has ever lawfully been handed over to the rulers of the state. If, in this matter, the right of anyone else has ever been violated, no one can truly say that it has been violated by the Church. Would that the teaching of the naturalists, besides being full of falsehood and injustice, were not also the fertile source of much detriment and calamity. But it is easy to see at a glance the greatness of the evil which unhallowed marriages have brought, and ever will bring on the whole of human society. From the beginning of the world, indeed, it was divinely ordained that things instituted by God and by nature should be proved by us to be the more profitable and salutary, the more they remain unchanged in their full integrity. For God, the maker of all things, well knowing what was good for the institution and preservation of each of his creatures, so ordered them by his will and mind that each might adequately attain the end for which it was made. If the rashness or the wickedness of human agency venture to change or disturb that order of things which has been constituted with fullest foresight, then the designs of infinite wisdom and usefulness begin either to be hurtful or cease to be profitable, partly because through the change undergone they have lost their power of benefiting, and partly because God chooses to inflict punishment on the pride and audacity of man. Now, those who deny that marriage is holy and who relegate it stripped of all holiness among the class of common secular things, uproot thereby the foundations of nature, not only resisting the designs of providence, but so far as they can, destroying the order that God has ordained. No one, therefore, should wonder if from such insane and impious attempts there spring up a crop of evils pernicious in the highest degree, both to the salvation of souls and to the safety of the commonwealth. If, then, we consider the end of the divine institution of marriage, we shall see very clearly that God intended it to be a most fruitful source of individual benefit and of public welfare. Not only in strict truth was marriage instituted for the propagation of the human race, but also that the lives of husbands and wives might be made better and happier. This comes about in many ways, by their lightening each other's burdens through mutual help, by constant and faithful love, by having all their possessions in common, and by the heavenly grace which flows from the sacrament. Marriage also can do much for the good of families, for so long as it is conformable to nature and in accordance with the counsels of God, it has power to strengthen union of heart in the parents, to secure the holy education of children, to temper the authority of the father by the example of the divine authority, to render children obedient to their parents and servants obedient to their masters. From such marriages as these, the state may rightly expect a race of citizens animated by a good spirit and filled with reverence and love for God, recognizing it their duty to obey those who rule justly and lawfully, to love all, and to injure no one. These many and glorious fruits were ever the product of marriage, so long as it retained those gifts of holiness, unity, and indissolubility from which proceeded all its fertile and saving power. Nor can anyone doubt but that it would always have brought forth such fruits at all times and in all places, had it been under the power and guardianship of the Church, the trustworthy preserver and protector of these gifts. But now there is a spreading wish to supplant natural and divine law by human law, and hence has begun a gradual extinction of that most excellent ideal of marriage which nature herself had impressed on the soul of man, and sealed, as it were, with her own zeal. Nay, more, even in Christian marriages, this power productive of so great good has been weakened by the sinfulness of man. Of what advantage is it if a state can institute nuptials estranged from the Christian religion, which is the mother of all good, cherishing all sublime virtues, quickening and urging us to everything that is the glory of a lofty and generous soul. When the Christian religion is reflected and repudiated, marriage sinks of necessity into the slavery of man's vicious nature and vile passions, and finds but little protection in the help of natural goodness. A very torrent of evil has flowed from this source, not only into private families, but also into states. For the salutary fear of God being removed, and there being no longer that refreshment in toil which is nowhere more abounding than in the Christian religion, it very often happens, as indeed is natural, that the mutual services and duties of marriage seem almost unbearable, and thus very many years for the loosening of the tie which they believe to be woven by human law and of their own will. Whenever incompatibility of temper, or quarrels, or the violation of the marriage vow, or mutual consent, or other reasons induce them to think that it would be well to be set free. Then, if they are hindered by law from carrying out this shameless desire, they contend that the laws are iniquitous, inhuman, and at variance with the rights of free citizens, adding that every effort should be made to repel such enactments and to introduce a more humane code sanctioning divorce. Now, however much the legislators of these our days may wish to guard themselves against the impiety of men, such as we have been speaking of, they are unable to do so, seeing that they profess to hold and defend the very same principles of jurisprudence, and hence they have to go with times and render divorce easily obtainable. History itself shows this, for, to pass over other instances, we find that at the close of the last century, divorces were sanctioned by law in that upheaval, or rather, as it might be called, conflagration in France, when society was wholly degraded by the abandoning of God. Many at the present time would fain have those laws reenacted, because they wish God and His Church to be altogether exiled and excluded from the midst of human society, madly thinking that in such laws a final remedy must be sought for that moral corruption which is advancing with rapid strides. Truly, it is hardly possible to describe how great are the evils that flow from divorce. Matrimonial contracts are by it made variable, mutual kindness is weakened, deplorable inducement to unfaithfulness are supplied, harm is done to the education and training of children, occasion is afforded for the breaking up of homes, the seeds of dissension are sown among families, the dignity of womanhood is lessened and brought low, and women run the risk of being deserted after having ministered to the pleasures of men. Since then, nothing has such power to lay waste families and destroy the mainstay of kingdoms as the corruption of morals. It is easily seen that divorces are in the highest degree hostile to the prosperity of families and states, springing as they do from the depraved morals of the people, and as experience shows us, opening out a way to every kind of evil, doing in public and in private life. Further still, if the matter be duly pondered, we shall clearly see these evils to be the more especially dangerous because divorce, once being tolerated, there will be no restraint powerful enough to keep it within the bounds marked out or presurmised. Great indeed is the force of example, and even greater still the might of passion. With such incitements, it must needs follow that the eagerness for divorce, daily spreading by devious ways, will seize upon the minds of many like a virulent contagious disease, or like a flood of water bursting through every barrier. These are truths that doubtlessly are all clear in themselves, but they will become clearer yet if we call to mind the teachings of experience. So soon as the road to divorce began to be made smooth by law, at once quarrels, jealousies, and judicial separations largely increased. And such shamelessness of life followed that men who had been in favor of these divorces repented of what they had done, and feared that if they did not carefully seek a remedy by repelling the law, the state itself might come to ruin.